If you could press rewind, turn back the clock, and restart your fitness journey, would you do it? Fortunately or unfortunately for me, I've got almost every detail of my fitness journey documented up until this point, so I have the ability to look back at the things I've done, critique the mistakes, the fuck-ups, the mishaps, and pretty much everything around it. In this video, we're going back to my roots with some hardcore training, sharing the anecdotes of some pretty unique individuals in the fitness community, and hopefully I can connect with some of you guys along the way. These are the things we wish we knew when we first started lifting. Progressive overload is the backbone of all training progression. Whether your goal is bodybuilding or powerlifting, setting the goal to incrementally improve your lifts each session through an increase of reps, sets, intensity, or even just simple technique adjustments is a great quantifiable way to assess whether or not your training is actually going to be effective in the long run. Initially, when I started training each session, I didn't have the goal of adding 10 pounds, 5 pounds, or even 2.5 pounds to the bar, or performing an additional set or even an additional rep, but that should have been the goal. Of course, this can't be done endlessly considering the accumulation of systemic fatigue and your overall years of training, so make sure you do auto-regulate and prioritize taking a deload when necessary. So essentially what this could look like is 4 weeks of training progression starting with reps in reserve and leaving some gas in the tank, so not going particularly all out, and ending with you crawling out of the gym with multiple sets past failure. And then you deload and repeat. Okay, so we're here with Richie Chan, IBB Pro, who is 6 weeks out from his next competition in Ohio. What are 3 things that you wish you knew when you started lifting that you think would have helped you along the way?
Definitely increasing the volume. Volume and quality reps builds muscle.
There is no one particular way to train. High reps or lightweight, low reps or heavyweight. Depending on your genetics, your training history, physiology, your body is unique and will definitely respond differently to certain types of exercise compared to other people. When I first got into lifting, I found that using a lighter load, prioritizing my technique, and increasing the amount of volume that I was doing was very beneficial to my soccer training. If you didn't know, in the past, my goal was to become a professional football player or soccer player. So that style of training fit what I was doing very well. As the years went on and I got deeper into my training progression, I recognized that I did need to switch the style of training that I was doing in order to mitigate the amount of plateaus that I was hitting throughout my progression. So what I ended up doing was sticking with a particular rep range, say the 8 to 10 rep range, working within 3 to 5 reps of failure, and then as soon as I couldn't progress the weight or the number of sets that I was doing with a particular weight, then I shifted to a different rep range and kept my intensity at the same level. Jumping to nutrition, eat to fuel your training, don't train to fuel your eating. Taking my first dive into the nutrition side of things was actually something that happened more organically than you think. It was actually my mom initially who got myself and Braden and Tyler into a low-carb ketogenic approach, and with my goals in pursuing professional football, a somewhat endurance-based pursuit, it was pretty fitting. Prioritizing nutrition definitely allowed me to perform far better than I ever really thought I could, and should be the backbone of your workout plan, especially as you start.
I wish I knew more about nutrition.
I mean, first of all, I think it's gonna have to start off with just eating properly, proper nutrition, and supplementing.
When you're first starting training, getting your protein in. When I was younger, I didn't know to shoot for at least a pound, and for every body weight a pound you have, you need at least a gram of protein. And I find like all the young guys just don't eat enough protein in their diet. So that's probably the most important thing, Tristyn, would be getting your protein in.
I think what I know now, if I would have known that when I started 13 years ago, I mean, who knows where I could be today.
When I first started, I just kind of ate as much as I possibly could, and I got pretty heavy. It took a long time to cut all the weight, and you know, when I was cutting all that weight, I developed some eating disorders and whatnot. I started like binging, and I could have avoided that if I just, you know, known to like lean bulk from the start. Take it slow and steady. I think taking it slow and steady is more important than anything, whether you're cutting or bulking, because your body needs time to adjust to the changes that you're introducing to it.
Jeff highlights a very good point here, and this is certainly something that I struggled with, as you guys know, as I've posted about in my previous videos. It's important to start your training from a good place and a good mentality. Now, this is pretty difficult to say because a lot of us get into the gym to fill some sort of insecurity that we have about ourselves, but it's important to recognize that insecurity and to work from a place of wanting to make yourself better and not from a place of wanting to beat yourself down. The old saying of abs are made in the kitchen may not necessarily ring true from a hypertrophic standpoint, but over the years as I've progressed, what I've found is that you can't effectively out-exercise a poor diet, and that goes for both building muscle and losing fat. When I was looking at it from a fat loss side of things, although my 15-minute HIIT workout seemed like the most intense calorie burning workout, it's really unlikely that it justified me eating an additional 500 calories, regardless of where those calories are coming from in my high or low carb approach. In most cases, when I was implementing this sort of cardio, because of the fairly substantial reduction in my non-exercise activity thermogenesis through fidgeting throughout the day and normal activities, I ended up burning the same or even less calories than I would have if I were not to do the HIIT session at all. Now, this isn't to say that you shouldn't do HIIT or any sort of high-intensity cardio or even low-intensity cardio. There's tons of additional health benefits to doing those sort of things. But when you're looking at it from strictly a fat loss perspective, you're not going to gain far more benefit from adding in additional HIIT sessions that increase your appetite throughout the week. And if you're looking at things from a muscle building perspective, which I assume the majority of you are, the same principles can apply. Although years of chronic dieting worked for me, well, at least initially, eventually I hit a point where I wasn't going to be able to outlive my malnutrition or undereating. Which brings me back to my point. Eat to fuel your training, don't train to fuel your eating. Look at your sessions, see what's required, and fuel accordingly. This is where I think food selection can be very important. Especially when you first start lifting, you may think that slamming back calories is 100% necessary, or you may be like me and struggled with your hunger signaling. Initially, when I ate a standard American diet or standard Canadian diet, since I am Canadian, I found it quite difficult to assess if my hunger cues and signaling was actually accurate to what was required. Anytime that I would indulge in any sort of sugary treat or something that would set off additional hunger cravings, I would actually overeat for what's required for building muscle. Now, this isn't to say that other people can't work on a more quote-unquote balanced approach with balanced macronutrient profiles, because they certainly can. But for me personally, as soon as I eliminated those sugar cravings, those additional snacks, and stuck to a strictly carnivore, ketogenic-esque diet, I was able to assess my hunger cues a lot better, and then I could fuel for my training accordingly. If I'm more hungry, I eat more. If I train more, I feel more hungry, and I know that I'm not just eating for the sake of it, or I'm eating because I'm snacking more and more and more. I can actually accurately assess my hunger cues. Sleep and recovery is just as important as training. When I first started lifting, and even more so when I started making fitness-related content, I trained so bloody hard, but I made so little progress. I got really caught up in always trying to do more and didn't really account for the fact that growth happens in the 22 and a half hours that you're not actually in the gym training. It's pretty ironic considering how much I would prioritize quote-unquote optimization of everything, and I think a lot of people are really like this, but didn't really look into any of the simple factors that would be far more effective than any sort of perfectly executed program with zero rest. If I went back in time to optimize my newbie gains, or even just regular gains over the years, I would have told myself to shoot for at least 7 to 8 hours of quality sleep per night, take a little more rest days, probably more when I was young, and since there's so many young people getting into fitness, I think that's probably something important that I should point out. And I'd always ensure that I'm eating enough protein, which I would say is 1 gram per pound of body weight would do the trick. If you're not morbidly obese or extremely underweight, then you could probably just go based off of your normal body weight and don't need to concern yourself with lean body mass. And then on top of that, just cutting out all of the negative BS that was affecting my ability to recover for my next training session. Stress is stress regardless of where it's coming from, so your body's going to recognize that as stress and either put you in a catabolic state or just a negative state for muscle building purposes. Obviously, I know this is easier said than done. People work jobs, people live lives, and for me, it's probably easier than the majority of the population, being that pretty much all of my job is training. So be ready to give yourself some grace, even if you're not 100% all of the time. Like I was saying, the stress response when you're trying to quote unquote optimize everything, for some people will outweigh the benefits of that so-called optimization. So you really have to find your own threshold for what you can or cannot handle, both physically and mentally, because those two really can't be separated.
Girls don't care how strong you get. Lifting won't care how short you are. There'll always be something to have a crippling insecurity about.
You need to find happiness no matter where you're at, what you look like, what other people think about you, or how much you can lift. Growing up, I was always the shortest kid in the class, and as many of you know, smallest player on the field. No matter where I was or who I spent my time with, I was always the shortest person. I got picked on, I got bullied at school, and although it wasn't the best of experiences, I think ultimately it led me to where I am today. When I was 15 years old, I was pretty skinny, I was small, I had very little self-confidence, which even subconsciously was part of what drove me to the gym. It was just an escape from all of the anxiety and depression that I seemed to experience on a daily basis. I know it might seem pretty ego-driven or narcissistic to focus so heavily on making myself look more attractive or more muscular or improve my performance, whatever it may be, but for me, it was so much more than that, and I can't even really say that I was doing any of the work that I was doing for other people. When I first started lifting, I finally got the opportunity to control something in my life which seemed so unpredictable and uncontrollable in the first place. But eventually, I think this was to my detriment. To be so constantly hyper-focused on external things like how lean I looked, how muscular I was, or how much I could lift led me down the same negative spiral, searching for some sort of validation or some way to prove myself to the world, similar to how I was even before I got into working out. It's far more important than I thought to reflect on the past a lot, but also to never dwell on it, which is often why you need a plan, an end goal, or some sort of structure to objectively keep you on track. Build a solid foundation and have a plan. This is more critical than you think. When I first hit the gym, my only real thought was, how can I do more? Which was extremely counterproductive. The way I should have been looking at things was from an objective perspective. I was sending so many counterproductive signals to my body. I was working out with the goal of building muscle. Then I do cardio, a catabolic signal, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just not on the same track as hypertrophic stimulus. And then I train again, raising my stress and probably sending more catabolic signals, all with the hopes of getting to this illusory end goal so much faster. Had I even the simplest of structures, including taking 1 to 2 rest days per week, doing only X number of sets per muscle group per week, which now I'd say is probably 10 to 20 effective sets per week, and as you get more and more into training, you'll learn what effective sets truly are, then I would have gotten to where I wanted to a lot faster with a lot less injuries, less stress, far better outcomes, and I wouldn't have had to deal with that whole negative cycle of running myself in circles. Which brings me to the next thing I wish I knew. More is not always better.
Focusing not only on progressing loads, but getting good technique with the purpose of movement and not just like doing the movement as an execution. Pretty much focus on fundamentals, because a lot of times people try to just execute, meaning like they just try to get the weight up, and then it comes at the cost of what their goal is of building muscle. So focus on fundamentals and get your nutrition and recovery needs, that being sleep, all the basics.
When you're doing more reps or higher volume, it's not always better. I legitimately did this all of the time when I first started training, and I can tell you there are extreme benefits to working in higher volume rep ranges and forcing your body to adapt to it. The thing is that training in excessively high rep ranges for too long impeded my recovery for my next sets, my next exercises, and my next training sessions, and because I hadn't developed a solid structure, a plan where I was tracking my progressive overload week over week, I found myself slipping back in my overall volume, I found myself slipping back in my effective sets, and week over week, I wasn't able to really push those limits that would drive any sort of actual hypertrophic stimulus. I don't completely throw pump work out the window, because for me, I've always found that it helped build a solid mind-muscle connection, and eventually got to a point where even in my top sets with heavy loads, I didn't have to divert my attention or energy to contracting this specific muscle. It just contracted whenever it was needed to.
Form. I wish I put that first and foremost in everything I did, because I would have avoided a lot of injuries I'm having right now, or having to deal with. So form, put that first and foremost, and then everything else will fall into place.
When I initially started my training, one area that I was very successful in was prioritizing my technique and muscular contractions over the load that I was using. The number one priority was always technique, and muscular contractions and mind-muscle connection usually just happen simply through the nature of following a biomechanically correct technique. As you guys can probably tell from all of these quite experienced lifters, IFBB pros, powerlifters, bodybuilders, people who have experience in the fitness community, one thing that they all say in common is that good things take time. You can't rush the process expecting the outcome to be different or to come earlier just by ramming yourself in the wall over and over again. This is definitely a mistake I made when I first started lifting. So with all that being said, if any of these tips from any of us helped you, please let me know in the comment section down below, and let me know what you guys wish you knew when you started lifting as well. See you in the next one. Peace.